By Sunday afternoon, the treehouse was taking shape. Daniel had worked through most of Saturday while Sarah kept the twins occupied with a trip to the movies and lunch at their favorite restaurant. Now, as the basic platform and supporting beam stood proudly among the oak's branches, Emma and Ethan watched wide-eyed from below. "Can we come up yet, Dad?" Ethan called, bouncing on his toes. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "Not yet, buddy. I need to secure the railings first. Safety first, remember?" He'd been surprised by how therapeutic the construction process had been. Each hammered nail a small act of rebellion, each secured beam a declaration of parental devotion. The physical labor helped channel his frustration with the HOA's rigid bureaucracy. Sarah emerged from the house carrying a pitcher of lemonade. She'd been quiet about his decision to proceed without approval, neither explicitly supporting nor condemning his actions. But she'd made sandwiches, kept him hydrated, and distracted the neighbors when they got too curious. Her silent partnership spoke volumes. "It's looking good," she admitted, handing him a glass. "The kids are over the moon." Daniel descended the ladder. "We should be able to finish the main structure by next weekend. Then they can help with the fun parts. The windows, the trap door, the pulley system." The sound of a car door slamming interrupted their conversation. Sarah glanced toward the fence. "That's the Petersons' car." No sooner had she spoken than a shrill voice called over the fence. "Daniel, Sarah, I need to speak with you immediately." Daniel exchanged a look with Sarah. "Here we go," he muttered. Diane Westfield didn't wait for an invitation. The gate to their backyard swung open, and the HOA president marched in, clipboard in hand. She was a slight woman in her 60s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and perpetually pursed lips, today painted an alarming shade of coral. Behind her stood Margaret Peterson, smartphone already raised and recording. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Diane demanded, gesturing wildly at the treehouse. Daniel set down his lemonade. "Building a birthday present for my children." "Your application was explicitly denied," Diane snapped, waving the copy of the rejection letter. "This is a direct violation of the covenant you signed when purchasing this property." "My children have a right to play in their own backyard," Daniel replied evenly, conscious of the twins watching the exchange with wide eyes. "What they have is an obligation to abide by the rules of this community, as do you," Diane retorted. "That structure violates at least 7 different provisions in our guidelines." Sarah stepped forward. "Diane, surely we can discuss this reasonably. It's just a treehouse, not a skyscraper. It's an unauthorized construction that exceeds height limitations, uses unapproved materials, and creates an attractive nuisance that could increase insurance liability for the entire neighborhood." Diane was practically reading from a script, her voice rising with each alleged violation. "Not to mention it's an eyesore that will depreciate property values." "An eyesore?" Daniel laughed incredulously. "It's a classic wooden treehouse in a tree. What exactly were you expecting to see in a residential neighborhood? Empty yards with no signs of life." Margaret Peterson stepped forward, her phone still recording. "The Aesthetics Committee has very clear guidelines about." "I don't care about your Aesthetics Committee," Daniel interrupted. "This is my property, my tree, and my children's happiness we're talking about." "Actually," Diane said, a smug smile spreading across her face, "when you signed the covenant, you explicitly agreed that external appearances fall under HOA jurisdiction." Page 42, paragraph 3. Emma had crept closer during the exchange, her small hand finding her father's. "Are they going to make us take down our treehouse, Dad?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. Daniel squeezed her hand. "No, sweetheart, they're not." Diane's eyes narrowed. "You have 48 hours to dismantle that structure, or the HOA will be forced to take action." "What action might that be?" Sarah asked, stepping protectively in front of Emma. "First, we'll issue a formal violation notice with daily fines. If those aren't paid promptly, we'll place a lion on your property. And if necessary, we'll seek an injunction from the court to have the structure removed at your expense." Diane delivered this litany of threats with almost cheerful efficiency. Daniel felt his temperature rising. "Let me make sure I understand. You're threatening to take us to court over a children's treehouse? Do you realize how absurd that sounds? Rules are rules, Mr. Harrington. They protect everyone's investments." "They protect nothing but your power trip," Daniel shot back. "And I'm starting to think this has nothing to do with property values or aesthetics. This is about control." Margaret gasped theatrically. "How dare you?" Diane volunteers her time to maintain the standards of this neighborhood. "Dad," Ethan had joined them now, his expression confused and hurt. "What's happening?" Before Daniel could answer, the sound of a car horn interrupted them. A silver SUV pulled up in front of the house, and a man in his 40s stepped out, followed by a teenage boy. "Everything okay over here?" the man called, approaching the gate. "We could hear the commotion from down the street." Daniel recognized Mike Rodriguez, whose family lived 3 houses down. His son Diego was on the same soccer team as Ethan. The Harringtons are in violation of HOA regulations, Diane explained stiffly. We're simply informing them of the consequences. Mike surveyed the scene, taking in the partially built treehouse, the frightened children, and the confrontational stance of the HOA representatives. His expression hardened. Seems to me like you're harassing a family on their private property on a Sunday afternoon, he said. That treehouse looks pretty great to me. Diego's been talking about it nonstop since he heard about it. Diane's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This isn't your concern, Michael. Actually, it is, Mike replied. As a member of this community, I have a vested interest in making sure we don't become the kind of neighborhood where children can't even have a treehouse. Margaret lowered her phone slightly. The covenant clearly states. I know what the covenant states, Mike interrupted. I also know that the Chen family has a playset that exceeds the height restriction, the Abbotts have a non-regulation bird bath, and your own garden gnome collection, Diane, violates the lawn ornament provision. Yet somehow, only certain violations seem to matter. A flush crept up Diane's neck. Those are completely different situations. Are they? Mike challenged. Or is it just that the Harringtons had the audacity to question your authority? Daniel glanced at Sarah, surprised by this unexpected ally. Around them, more neighbors had begun to gather. The Goldsteins stood at their adjacent fence, watching intently. Across the street, the Abbotts had emerged from their house, curious about the commotion. Diane seemed to realize she was losing control of the narrative. This isn't a public spectacle, she hissed. This is a private HOA matter. Then perhaps you should have handled it privately, Sarah suggested, instead of barging into our yard and upsetting our children. Sensing defeat, Diane straightened her jacket. You'll be receiving formal documentation of your violation tomorrow, along with the schedule of accumulating fines. I strongly suggest you reconsider your position. She turned on her heel and marched toward the gate, Margaret scurrying behind her. As they left, Mike approached Daniel, extending his hand. Sorry about that. Diane's been on a power trip ever since she became president. Thanks for stepping in, Daniel said, shaking his hand. No problem. Listen, a bunch of us have been talking. This isn't the first time the HOA has gone overboard. Maybe it's time we did something about it. Like what? Sarah asked. Mike grinned, like running for the board ourselves at the next election. In the meantime, how about some help with that treehouse? Diego and I are pretty handy, and I bet we can rally a few more neighbors. As Mike spoke, Daniel noticed other neighbors nodding in agreement. The Chens were already approaching, tools in hand. Even the elderly Mr. Goldstein was tightening his work gloves. What do you think, kids? Daniel asked, turning to Emma and Ethan. Should we accept some help with your treehouse? The twins' faces lit up with excitement, their earlier distress forgotten in the face of community support. By sunset, the treehouse had a completed platform, secure railings, and the beginnings of walls. What had started as a family project had transformed into a neighborhood statement. As Daniel watched the improvised crew pack up their tools, he felt a surge of pride, not just in the treehouse taking shape in his oak tree, but in the community forming around it. What none of them realized was that Diane Westfield was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. In her home office, she was already drafting emails to the HOA's attorney, preparing for a battle that would soon escalate beyond anyone's expectations. The manila envelope that arrived on Thursday morning was significantly thicker than previous HOA communications. Daniel set his coffee down to examine its contents. A formal violation notice, a schedule of daily fines beginning at $100 and increasing by $50 each day, and a letter from Westfield and Associates, attorneys at law. They're actually suing us, Daniel said in disbelief, passing the documents to Sarah. They've filed for an emergency injunction to halt construction and force removal of the treehouse. Sarah scanned the legal documents, her expression darkening. Diane's brother-in-law is a real estate attorney. This is his letterhead. She looked up at Daniel. Court date is set for next Monday. That's insane. It's been less than 2 weeks since we started building. They're calling it an immediate hazard to community well-being and property values. Sarah read aloud, her voice tinged with incredulity. And look at this. They've included photographs taken from multiple angles, including aerial shots. Daniel peered over her shoulder. Those are drone photos. They were spying on our backyard. Technically, airspace isn't protected by privacy laws, Sarah said, her background in paralegal work surfacing. But still, this feels extremely invasive. The twins' excited voices drifted in from the backyard, where they were playing in their nearly completed treehouse. The neighborhood building effort had accelerated construction, and while some finishing touches remained, the structure was now fully functional, complete with a rope ladder, trapdoor, and the pulley system the children had wanted. We can't let them take this away, Daniel said, his voice tight. Not now. Look how happy they are. Sarah set the papers down. We need a lawyer, Dan. A good one. Can we afford that? Sarah chewed her lip thoughtfully. My cousin Rachel specializes in property law. She might be willing to help or at least point us in the right direction. Daniel nodded and then froze as a thought struck him. Wait, do we need to tell the kids? The hearing is during school hours, but let's not worry them yet, Sarah decided. Not until we know more about our options. Later that evening, after the twins were asleep, Sarah's cousin Rachel joined them via video call, reviewing the documents with professional efficiency. The good news, Rachel said, is that HOAs often overreach and judges know it. The bad news is that you did technically violate the covenant you signed when purchasing the property. So we have no case. Daniel asked, deflated. I didn't say that, Rachel replied with a slight smile. First, there's the matter of selective enforcement. Your neighbor mentioned other violations that went unpunished, right? Document those. Photographs, dates, any communication about them. Sarah was already taking notes. The Chen family's playset, the Abbott's bird bath, Diane's garden gnomes. Exactly. Second, there's the question of reasonableness. Courts generally require HOA rules to be reasonable and evenly applied. A judge might find that prohibiting children's play structures entirely is unreasonably restrictive. Daniel felt a flicker of hope. So we have a fighting chance. Yes, but be prepared. Legal battles with HOAs can get ugly and expensive. They often have deeper pockets than individual homeowners. That's why we need community support, Sarah realized. If enough neighbors stand with us, maybe the HOA board will reconsider. Rachel nodded. Smart. Divide their power base. I'll draft a response to the injunction request and represent you at the hearing. In the meantime, gather as much support as you can. The next day, Daniel took a personal day from work. He spent the morning photographing other covenant violations throughout the neighborhood, carefully documenting each with location and date. By afternoon, he compiled an impressive catalog of unenforced infractions, from non-regulation mailboxes to unauthorized garden structures. Sarah, meanwhile, had created a neighborhood email group and was organizing a community meeting for that evening at the Rodriguez home. Her message was simple but compelling. Today, it's our treehouse. Tomorrow, it could be your swing set, garden, or holiday decorations. Where do we draw the line? As dusk fell, nearly 20 neighbors gathered in Mike Rodriguez's living room. Sarah and Daniel shared their story, passing around photographs of the now-completed treehouse alongside copies of the legal documents they'd received. They're taking the family to court over a children's play structure. Mike summarized, his indignation clear. And they're using our HOA dues to pay for the legal fees. This revelation sparked outrage among the assembled neighbors. I didn't sign up for my $350 quarterly fee to be used persecuting families, said Eleanor Chen, mother of 2 elementary school children. There's an HOA board election coming up in 2 months, noted Robert Abbott. Maybe it's time for a change in leadership. Throughout the meeting, a plan took shape. They would attend Monday's hearing en masse to show support, begin a petition to change the covenant's more restrictive provisions, and assemble a slate of candidates for the upcoming board election. As the meeting concluded, Daniel felt cautiously optimistic. They had allies, a strategy, and competent legal representation. Perhaps there was a path forward that didn't involve dismantling his children's beloved treehouse. What he didn't know was that Diane Westfield had her own meeting that night with a smaller but equally determined group of supporters, mostly older homeowners without children who viewed the covenant's strict rules as protection for their property investments. It's not just about one treehouse, Diane insisted to her gathered allies. It's about maintaining standards. If we allow the Harringtons to flout the rules, what's next? Painted houses in unapproved colors, visible basketball hoops, lawn ornaments visible from the street, our community will descend into chaos. Margaret Peterson nodded vigorously. Property values would plummet. We'd be no better than Rosewood Acres. She named a nearby neighborhood notorious for its less stringent regulations. My brother-in-law assures me the law is on our side, Diane continued. The covenant is binding. The Harringtons knew the rules when they moved here. But what if the judge sides with them? Asked Frederick Winters, a retired banker whose immaculate lawn was his pride and joy. The community seems divided on this. A calculating expression crossed Diane's face. Then we need to make sure the treehouse violation is so egregious that no judge could possibly rule in their favor. What do you mean? Margaret asked. I'm simply saying that if the treehouse were to become a genuine safety hazard, our case would be significantly stronger. Diane's tone was deliberately casual, but her meaning was clear. Frederick shifted uncomfortably. Diane, you're not suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, she interrupted smoothly. I'm merely pointing out that sometimes situations need to evolve in our favor. Now, who needs more wine? Monday morning arrived with an unexpected development. Daniel was loading his briefcase for the hearing when his phone rang. It was Rachel. The hearing's been postponed, she announced without preamble. Westfield's attorney requested a continuance. They claim they need time to gather additional evidence of the treehouse's structural hazards. That's ridiculous, Daniel protested. It's perfectly sound. Mike Rodriguez is a contractor, for heaven's sake. He helped build it. I know, but judges typically grant first continuance requests. We're rescheduled for next Thursday. Daniel shared the news with Sarah. I don't like this, she said. Why would they need more time? They've already filed for an injunction. Maybe they realized their case is weaker than they thought, Daniel suggested hopefully. Sarah didn't seem convinced. Maybe, or maybe they're planning something else. That night, neither of them slept well. Something about the postponement felt ominous, a tactical maneuver in a game they didn't fully understand. Their unease was justified when they were awakened at 2:17 a.m. by a frantic pounding on their front door. Daniel stumbled downstairs, bleary-eyed, to find Mike Rodriguez on their porch, his expression grave. You need to come quickly, he said urgently. It's the treehouse. Daniel didn't wait to hear more. He grabbed his shoes and followed Mike across lawns, guided by an orange glow that seemed to be coming from the direction of his backyard. As they rounded the corner of the house, Daniel stopped dead in his tracks, a cry of shock escaping his lips. The treehouse was engulfed in flames, fire licking up the trunk of the ancient oak and consuming the wooden structure. The heat was intense even from a distance, sparks and embers floating upward like malevolent fireflies against the night sky. In the flickering light, Daniel could make out the silhouettes of neighbors who had rushed to help and the flashing lights of fire trucks that had just arrived. But it was already too late for the treehouse. The flames had taken hold, transforming what had been a symbol of childhood joy into a blazing pyre that illuminated the neighborhood like a macabre beacon.